It's time to call the exterminator and get the rat poison ready. We're taking a quick peek at Warhammer Vermintide 2. There have been so many flipping Warhammer games as of now, it's hard to find someone who hasn't at least heard of the series. While the older games in the franchise were some form of strategy game, ever since Games Workshop opened up its license to pretty much anyone a few years ago, the market has been flooded with the things. There's the turn-based and violent Blood Bowl games, there's RTSs, massive ship combat games, third-person shooters, first-person shooters, and even one where you're a pirate. Most of these games, however, stick to the Warhammer 40k branch of the IP that's focused on the grim, dark future of science fiction, opposed to the original incarnation with Warhammer Fantasy, created as a tabletop role-playing game in 1983. Few take a crack at anything but the 40k universe, but while it's a minority of the property at this point, you can still find some here and there if you look hard enough. Warhammer Vermintide 2 just so happens to be one of those titles that dips into the fantasy universe, and is a sequel to Fat Shark's Warhammer End Times Vermintide from 2015. Their previous projects have mostly had a mixed reception, to say the least, with the puzzles of Hamilton's Great Adventures or the carnage of Bloodsports.tv. There was also Escape from Dead Island in there somewhere, if you're interested in that kind of a thing, but their most prominent game before the Vermintide ones was War of the Roses. The original Vermintide managed to gain quite an audience for being a well-put-together, cooperative, first-person level-based horde game, similar to Valve's Left 4 Dead series, and the sequel gives players a bit more of the same. The story is simple. A race of rat-like creatures known as the Skaven are invading the world, killing pretty much everything they come across in an attempt to take over, and it's up to 5 thrown-together individuals to try and stop them. You've got Marcus Kruber, who's a soldier that specializes in heavy weapons, Bardin Gorkison, who's a dwarf that can take one heck of a beating, an elf assassin named Kirlin, Victor Saltzpyre, the witch hunter captain, and finally, Sienna Fugonassus? Fugonassus, maybe? I'm not sure how to say that, but she's a witch that specializes in fire, which causes a bit of a problem with Victor over here. Begrudgingly, they end up being forced to work together or die separately apart, and while they still may not get along 100% in Vermintide 2, they've come to terms with their arrangement that it's better to fight the rats than fight each other. The overall story for this sequel is similar to that of the last. Basically, kill the Skaven and don't die. But there's a bit of a twist to expand the plot. This time, the Skaven aren't alone in their efforts to seemingly kill every living thing, and are aided by the forces of Chaos, who are the general bad guys of the Warhammer universe. Somehow, these two factions manage to capture all 5 heroes at the start of the game, and have some kind of plot to open a portal that'll do something. All I know is that after freeing everyone from their cages, you gotta go kill stuff that's trying to kill you and attempt not to die. The rest of the plot, while it's there for those who want to know it, is really not of all that importance. I found it kind of difficult to follow what was going on in the story anyway, as the game has a mission-based structure with multiple branches that can be played in any order. And while characters do communicate with each other throughout the game, it can be difficult to focus on what they're saying while also dealing with tons of enemies at the same time. Combat in Vermintide 2, like the plot, is similar to the first game, with a heavy emphasis on melee weapons over firearms. Since the game has an older fantasy setting, ranged weapons like guns aren't commonplace, and ammunition is both limited and scarce, even for the more periodically common weapons like bows and crossbows. This means that for the most part, players will be using melee combat to dispatch their foes, but that's more due to how weapons are equipped and just how many enemies you'll be facing than the overall usefulness of ranged weapons. Similar to Left 4 Dead, each mission pits 4 heroes against a swarm of enemies, with a few specialized ones sprinkled in here and there, as all 4 of them attempt to make it from point A to point B in order to complete a level. But unlike that game, a player's loadout can only be changed before and after a mission. There aren't any weapons to swap out or pick up while going through a level, and unlike other level-based horde games, like the Payday series, enemies aren't always using guns or ranged weapons, so they only sometimes drop ammunition when killed that can be collected and added to your own. While there are specific ammo crates that can be found throughout a level, as well as health kits, bombs, and potions, they are few and far between, and players can only carry so much with them at a time. One player, on their own, has a very limited inventory and can only carry one of 3 different types of items along with their weapons: health items, potions, and bombs. They're all very useful to staying alive, but deciding what to take with you when can be a life or death decision. There are 3 different kinds of potions that apply buffs to your character, such as making their attacks a lot stronger, or just making them move a heck of a lot faster for a limited period of time, as well as 2 different kinds of bombs, with one that just explodes and one that lights things on fire. The main thing to keep in mind with these is that they aren't the only things to find. Hidden throughout each level are things called tomes and grimoires that actively make the game more difficult but will reward you with extra goodies at the end of a level when all the scores are tallied up. Tomes take up the healing slot, while grimoires, on the other hand, only fit into the potion slot. Having a grimoire will decrease the maximum health of everyone by 30% for each one being carried, and there are 2 defined per level for a maximum of 60% less health, meaning you're more likely to die. Finishing a level with these special items will reward players with some extra XP, as well as increasing the quality of loot drops, which can make them a tempting distraction even if it makes it less likely that you'll finish the level in the first place. Vermintide 2 does have a revive system if a player runs out of health and falls over, or finds themselves in a place in a level that they're not supposed to be. There are also respawn locations where dead players can rejoin the fight, but if everyone dies within a level, it's game over. For some reason, Fat Shark decided not to include any kind of checkpoints within the game's levels, so if everyone dies, you're forced back to a hub area and have to restart the entire mission, which is problematic since levels in this game are pretty freaking long and rather confusing. It's extremely disheartening to have played a level for nearly half an hour or so, only to get a party wipe and have to start all over again. The only reason that I can guess as to why the developers did this is due to the game's progression system. Each character works as its own class with access to unique weapons and abilities, as well as subclasses as they level up, but each one has to be leveled up individually, and equipment is non-transferable. Vermintide 2 uses a loot box system for dealing out equipment, but thankfully it's not a microtransaction. Completing different challenges, as well as finishing a mission, will gain you a loot box with how well you did in that level and how many extra things you collected, leveling up the box you get, making it more likely to get better gear. These boxes can be opened at the game's hub area, but be careful who you're playing as when you do so. Equipment gained is specified to whichever character you are at that time, so you may not want to open a high-level chest with someone who you don't like playing as all that much, and instead save that for one of your favorites. Each character can also equip 5 different things at a time: a melee weapon, a ranged weapon, and some trinkets and necklaces. There's a decent variety to the kinds of weapons everyone can use, with the elf assassin having access to a sword with dual knives, while the dwarf can have a big hammer or a small hammer with a shield. This, combined with the different ranged weapons to pick from, makes for some variety to how each character plays throughout the game, but for the most part they all play pretty similarly. Enemies pile up by the dozens and die just as quickly, with very few of them posing any kind of a threat at all. Most of them, being Skaven rats or the hordes of chaos, just run at you with easy-to-block attacks and can be cut down in milliseconds. More specialized enemies like the Skaven's Gunner Runners or Pack Masters can single out players, making them defenseless until they're saved by someone else on the team, while Rattling Gunners or Warp Fire Throwers can deal some serious damage if not dealt with quickly. The forces of chaos have their own specialized enemies, like the Life Leech that can teleport around and be a real nuisance to deal with. But for the most part, I never found any of them to be that much of a problem. The only thing that really matters when it comes to enemies is if they have armor or not. The best way to deal with armor is just to attack around it, since it's specified to where it is on that enemy. Something like the Chaos Warrior has a high defense against ranged weapons and basic attacks, and can only really be damaged by hitting it in the head. But in all the madness that a normal fight can turn into, I found it much more important to just keep attacking and killing stuff than actually aiming where my attacks are going. The only real challenge I came across were the big baddies like Rat Ogres or Bile Trolls, who basically act as mini-bosses. They can tear a team apart if they aren't paying attention, but even at that, I rarely found myself failing missions. Which is kind of a good thing, as I said before, since there are no checkpoints. With the main way of playing being hacking away at everything you see and just how quickly enemies die, it makes combat rather unsatisfying. The most of a strategy that I could come up with was prioritizing special enemies and trying to kill them before they can get an attack off. But other than that, there's really not a whole lot to it. It's difficult to say if this is a problem with the game's combat system and enemy design due to how Vermintide 2 handles its difficulty selection. Every item in the game has a power rating associated with it, be it weapons or trinkets, and equipping those will add that power rating to your own for whatever character you give it to. When selecting a mission to play, the game only lets you pick a difficulty that matches your character's overall power rating, meaning that you'll have to grind through the progression system to get higher tier equipment if you want more of a challenge, and that is just dumb. It was annoying enough in a game like Raid World War II, a co-op horde mode game similar in style to Vermintide, that made its players complete a mission on one difficulty before you could attempt it on another one. But with Vermintide 2's system, I found myself playing the same levels over and over and over again, just trying to power up a character in an attempt to find a satisfying challenge. What doesn't help is how much the game wants you to play it online with other people instead of on your own with bots. Vermintide 2 does have AI support to play through the game on your own, but they aren't all that great and mostly leave it up to the player to do pretty much everything, while having difficulty dealing with some of the tougher enemies. This means that playing online is generally the better option, but unless you host a game yourself, you can't pick which mission to play and instead will randomly join some other host and, from my experience, end up playing the same level 100 times in a row. If you have a specific group of people to play with, then I'm sure this is a moot point, but if you don't, like me, then it can be kind of annoying to play through a level that you just completed. There is a little bit of replay value with different enemy placements which can help alleviate how repetitive this can be, but I really just wish the AI was a bit better so I could play through the campaign myself on whatever difficulty I wanted. Overall, Vermintide 2 is pretty much more of the same from Vermintide 1, but with some weird decisions mixed in. I'm not really a fan of how grindy the game's progression system is, and the power level nonsense for picking what difficulty you can play is just ridiculous. Combat, on the other hand, mostly feels mindless from the time that I spend with the game. Maybe on a higher difficulty, I would have to be more thoughtful on where I hit enemies and how I blocked attacks, but for the most part, I just ended up mashing the attack button until everything on my screen was dead. Each character does do a decent job at feeling unique, although the melee combat can feel a bit samey across the board. Each one has unique passive and active abilities, but I never really noticed them and rarely found myself needing to use them, or even saw anybody else using theirs for that matter. But they do exist, with upgrades being unlocked as players level up, so there is something to try to work for if you really want to. The only thing that I found that really affected how each character played were the weapons that were equipped, with some of them feeling way more satisfying than others. My favorite character to play as quickly became the Fire Witch, who has an overheat meter instead of ammunition, meaning she'll explode and die if she uses too much magic without letting it cool off. This lets her use her ranged weapons more than anybody else, since she doesn't have to worry about running out of ammunition, but her original staff's attack was rather pitiful and not all that great. After I found and equipped a different staff, on the other hand, that let me use something like a flamethrower, I actually found myself having some fun. I found it extremely satisfying to set a huge group of enemies ablaze and let it all burn down. None of the other firearms or bows really had this kind of effect on me, since most of them could only deal with one enemy at a time, and like I said before, they all had limited ammunition. The lack of level checkpoints and how complex levels can be is a bit of a pace killer, as I found myself getting lost a couple of times, and having to return to the hub area and restart a mission is just annoying. It only makes the game feel even more repetitive than it already is. Even at that, however, if you enjoyed the first Vermintide game and have a group of friends to play with, then there is some good fun to be had out of Vermintide 2. On the other hand, as a single-player game or joining with random players online, I found it leaving a lot to be desired. Thanks for watching. Please let me know what you think of the game or this video in the comments section. I'm MegapieMan, and I'll talk to you guys later. Want to see more of my stuff? Click on the video on the left for a quick peek at 100-Foot Robot Golf, the king's game of giant robots playing golf. Or click on the video on the right for freaking awesome guns in video games, where I talk about some freaking awesome guns you can find in video games. I know, it's crazy.